Okay, so now we have our 2 lining panels, our 2 exterior panels. I've added foam to my second exterior panel and my zipper. So we already made our zipper. So we're now going for the final construction. And what I've done is I've positioned my zipper centrally along the top edge of my exterior panel. The zipper pull is facing down, so the zipper and the exterior panel are right sides together. I am then going to sandwich that panel with one of my lining panels. Now you can see there that the lining panels are smaller. That's as they should be. The top edge here though should be exactly the same as your exterior panel, because we didn't alter that at all. We only altered the bottom edge. So match it up, making sure that your zipper doesn't move. Now, if you wanted to baste your zipper into place first before you put this lining on, you could do. I generally go down the path of least resistance, and I don't, just because it's something that I've done a lot of, so I don't feel like I need to. But it's up to you. It's very much up to you. If you're a new sewer, then baste it on first. So you can see there that top panel actually fits along the top there absolutely perfectly. It matches on both of those corners. It's just around the bottom edges that it doesn't. And I'm going to stitch that in place using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm just going to move the zipper pull out of the way because I don't want that in the way. I'm going to reduce my stitch length slightly. And I'm going to back stitch just at the beginning there. Right, I'm now down to the point where my zipper pull is, so I'm just going to raise my foot, pull my zipper pull out of the way. And we've stitched all the way across the top there. Now, remember we put that foam in and we basted it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the stitching that I used to baste my foam along this top edge. Now I'm using a craft knife because that's my preferred method to rip seams. If you prefer to use a seam ripper, then please do. Do not use a craft knife unless you're confident that you can do so, because you will rip holes in things that you don't need. And once I've taken that basting stitch out of the top there, I'm going to trim away the foam from the seam allowance there. Now obviously there's no foam in this pattern, so this is something I've added myself, so this isn't something you actually need to worry about if you have followed the pattern instructions. So now I have my lining and my exterior panel joined together, and my zipper is sitting in the middle. So I'm going to fold that lining panel behind my exterior panel, and I'm not actually going to press this because it does seem to sit quite nicely. What I am going to do is top stitch along this edge, and I'm going to do that using a different foot because that foot's too big. So I'm going to need to find my narrow foot. Let me see where I've put that. This one will do. It is important that you use the right foot for the right thing. This is actually referred to as a zipper foot, but I don't very often use it for zippers. But it's quite useful for top stitching close to things. So where we're going to stitch from this zipper tab to this zipper tab. We're not going to stitch right to the very end. And again, I'm going to leave a long thread at the beginning and the end because I'm going to tug off my stitching rather than back stitching. I'm just making sure that my zipper tab's not in the way, which it is, so I'm just going to kind of push it out of the way. And again, I'm top stitching it at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm just going to raise my foot, find my skitters, and I'm just going to take those threads from the front through the last hole to the back, and exactly the same at this end of my top stitching. And then I'm just going to tie them off. And rather than cutting, because this will be inside, I'm just going to again thread them up, and I'm going to push them through next door to that knot so that the thread ends come through and they're between the lining and the exterior. You can trim those down, they won't go anywhere, and then you have nothing, no obvious finish to your stitching. All your stitches are hidden effectively, all your ends are hidden. It's a quilting technique, but it looks so much nicer. It's not often, people don't often do it on fabrics. I like to do it on fabrics, but primarily I do it on faux leathers. So if you're sewing with faux leather, it's a really good habit to get into, or cork for that matter. And there we are, that's one exterior panel with the lining attached, and our zipper is beautifully fitted across the top there. So let's find our second lining panel and our second exterior panel. So we have our exterior panel first, and I'm going to take my zipper, this first panel that I've got with the zipper on it, and I'm going to lay my zipper centrally across the top. Now it's easier this time because actually, as long as your side bits match up, you know that your zipper's in the right place. And it has to be the sides of the exterior, not the sides of the lining, because you know the sides of the lining are smaller. So you can position that in place, and you can baste that in place if you want to, or you can just make your sandwich. You take your second lining panel and you lay it right sides together, making effectively a zipper sandwich, and then clip it in place. And I should be okay using this foot for this as well. So it's starting to get dark here. I do apologise if the light's not great. I've got my lights on. I'm hoping that it's enough for you to be able to see. Let me just... So I'm going to use this foot because this is the one I've got on, and I can use this, I know. So back stitch a little bit at the beginning and the end. Try not to catch that seam allowance that's there, but you don't want that to lift up. It just makes things bumpy inside if you do. You're using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance again, going through both the zipper the exterior and the lining. And here I've got my zipper pull, so I'm going to stop, raise my foot. I have to raise the lining and the front exterior. Move the zipper pull out of the way. Just make sure that you haven't pulled your zipper away from the side when you do that, because that happens a lot if you haven't basted it in place. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing again. I'm going to remove these basting stitches for the foam from the top of my pouch because I have added foam. This doesn't apply if you've used fusible fleece, obviously, because the fusible fleece should not be in your seam allowance. This is just for those of us that are rebels. I think I need a new blade in my craft knife. And we're going to trim out the foam from the seam allowance at the top as close as we can. Just make sure I haven't actually just cut my stitch. I think I might have done. As close as we can to our stitching, just to ensure that everything stays where it is. Okay, let's just it's a really good practice to get into if you use foam trimming out of the seam allowances. It allows the bag to sit so much nicer. And we're going to open up the exterior panel and the lining panel, and we're going to make sure that the lining panel is right behind the exterior panel. Finger pressing or using your iron. You don't want to see any of the lining panel poking out. And you're going to top stitch again from this point on the zipper tab to the same point on the other side. And we're going to bury our threads again. Kind of get where we're going now. All the way down. Raise your needle, leave long threads. You know what we're doing. Again, taking the threads from the top and the bottom, from the front and the inside, and tying those threads off And what did I do with my needle? There it is. And pushing them through so that they come in between the missed one, so they come in between the lining and the main panels. Now you will not see these once this is constructed. Let's just get rid of all my thread ends. So now you have your lining and you have your exterior. And what we're going to do is we are going to fold the two exterior panels together, and at the side there, at the top there, rather, where the lining panel meets the exterior panel, we're going to open up the seam allowance, matching up those two seams, those two open seams, and we're just going to pop a clip on. We're going to do exactly the same thing on the other side. Now, the one thing I will say at this point is check that your zipper pocket is open, because not checking that it's not open, that it's open at this point is foolhardy, because this is probably the last point where it's actually easily accessible and you don't really want to have to get a seam ripper out. So check that your interior zipper pocket, this one with the folded bottoms, is open. Now I've matched up both of those sides. I'm not clipping anything else at the moment. I've matched up both of those sides, and I'm just going to making sure that they're absolutely spot on. Those seams are perfectly together. I'm just going to stitch over that join, because that's the bit that if it's going to move, something's going to move, that's where it will move. So I'm just going to do a couple of stitches over that join to make sure that those seams are exactly together, which they are. I'm going to do exactly the same thing on the other side, making sure that those seam allowances stay open. You can just double check that everything is perfectly lined up, which it is, and that just helps. Everything else will fall into place. It's those bits there that are the bits that are most likely to move. So having done that, I'm now going to clip all the way around the outside. Your panels should sit perfectly together. Just holding the two exterior panels together and the two lining panels together. Everything should sit perfectly. Because you cut the two lining panels shorter, shaped them, tapered them, you do not need to increase your seam allowance when you go around the lining. You can use your 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around, which is so much easier. You also need to make sure that the zipper on the top of your bag is open. Suddenly realised, is mine open? It is, but I'm going to open it a little bit further. It's not open far enough for my big fat hands to get in. easier if everything is open at this point. So there we are. Everything is lined up. Everything looks great. And yeah, I'm going to stitch around all the way around the outside using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm just going to reduce my stitch length a little bit because I'm going to, this is a construction, so I don't want my stitch length to be 4, which is my top stitching length. I'm stitching at about just under 3. Remember, I've already stitched this bit, so it should all sit nicely. It won't move, and that's what happens sometimes when you're doing these sort of little pouch type things where you have the lining and the exterior meeting. Is as you stitched round, the two move, and you end up with a funny bit in the corner, which isn't very pleasant. So I'm going to go all the way around. Until you come back to where you started your stitching. You should, as long as you've kept a nice even seam allowance, you should come back to where you started from. And back stitch just to secure my threads. Right, now, because I've used foam, I need to remove the basting stitches from around the sides of my foam, because I'm going to cut the foam away from the seam allowances here. This is it's not got a gusset, it's not a big thick pouch. It's a slim little wristlet. And having all this in the seam, so it's just going to make it look bulky at the bottom, and it's not going to sit nicely on the curve. So I'm just going to trim, just going to get rid of all my stitching and trim off the seam allowances from the foam on both sides. I'm not sure you need necessarily to see me do that. Oh, it's a bit boring. But so I'll come back once I've removed all my foam.